Hey guys, tonight we continue our slow, slightly questionable journey through the long history of humanity, discovering new and increasingly creative ways to become intoxicated. Because once ancient civilizations realized fermented drinks could reduce stress, encourage storytelling, and temporarily convince people they were much better singers than reality suggested, there was absolutely no turning back. So before we continue tonight's strange historical adventure, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these slow dives into the weird side of history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're relaxing under blankets while learning how entire civilizations quietly built themselves around grain, grapes, and extremely optimistic decision-making. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift gently back into the ancient world together. By the time Roman power stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, alcohol had become so deeply woven into daily life that many people probably considered sobriety slightly suspicious. Roman soldiers carried wine on military campaigns across enormous distances. Merchants transported barrels through dangerous mountain roads and stormy seas. Tavern owners filled crowded streets with noise, arguments, gambling, and the occasional knife fight triggered by someone making deeply disrespectful comments about another man's donkey. Humanity was evolving magnificently. Roman military camps often included alcohol supplies because commanders understood something timeless about exhausted people. Fed soldiers are manageable. Slightly intoxicated soldiers are at least temporarily less likely to riot about weather conditions, terrible boots, or marching 20 miles through freezing mud while carrying half their body weight in equipment. Of course, this system occasionally produced the opposite effect. Somewhere near the northern borders of the empire, a Roman officer absolutely woke up after a feast, realizing several legionaries had drunkenly challenged local tribesmen to wrestling competitions beside a campfire. Empires are built on discipline. They are also quietly held together by people pretending not to notice ridiculous behavior. Roman taverns became central parts of urban life. These establishments ranged from respectable wine shops to deeply concerning rooms where sticky floors, loud shouting, and mysterious smells warned sensible people to immediately reconsider their evening plans. Travelers gathered there, exchanging news from distant provinces. Sailors bragged about storms they almost certainly exaggerated. Politicians quietly arranged deals while pretending to discuss philosophy. Meanwhile, somewhere in the corner, one exhausted poet explained for the 5th time why nobody truly appreciated his work. Some Roman writers complained constantly about taverns corrupting public morals, which historically speaking usually means ordinary people were enjoying themselves in ways wealthy intellectuals found irritating. Gambling, drinking, music, and prostitution often blended together inside crowded Roman nightlife. The empire may have built aqueducts, roads, and impressive architecture, but it also perfected the deeply human tradition of staying out too late while insisting tomorrow's responsibilities could absolutely wait another few hours. Wine itself became an enormous industry. Massive vineyards spread across Roman territory, while merchants shipped amphorae filled with wine throughout the Mediterranean world. Entire economies relied on alcohol production. Wealthy Romans developed extremely serious opinions about wine quality, aging methods, and regional differences. Some elite drinkers discussed vintage wine with such dramatic intensity that modern restaurant owners would probably admire the commitment. Expensive wines from certain regions became symbols of sophistication and status. Meanwhile, poorer citizens drank rougher mixtures that occasionally contained enough impurities to qualify as accidental chemistry experiments. But after long days of labor beneath the Mediterranean sun, most people were not demanding luxury tasting notes involving hints of berry or oak. They simply wanted something that dulled exhaustion while making crowded city life feel slightly less unbearable. And crowded Roman cities could become truly overwhelming. Smoke, sewage, crowded streets, shouting merchants, wandering animals, political tension, disease outbreaks, and enough body odor to frighten future historians. Under those conditions, a cup of wine probably felt emotionally necessary. Eventually, Rome declined, because all empires eventually discover that ruling enormous territories filled with ambitious humans becomes incredibly difficult over time. Political corruption spread. Invasions increased. Economies weakened. And somewhere during all this historical collapse, people continued drinking with remarkable dedication. After Rome fragmented, Europe entered the medieval period, where alcohol remained just as important, but life somehow became muddier, colder, and significantly more uncomfortable overall. Medieval Europe smelled strongly of wood smoke, wet wool, manure, damp straw, and collective exhaustion. Cities remained crowded and unsanitary. Roads turned into rivers of mud every time it rained. Most people worked constantly simply to survive another winter. Under these conditions, alcohol was no longer merely entertainment. It became woven into survival itself. Ale and beer were consumed daily by nearly everyone: men, women, children, monks, farmers, laborers, merchants, nobles. Entire societies quietly functioned on fermented grain and determination. Unlike modern beer, medieval ale often contained low alcohol levels and spoiled quickly. It was brewed locally in homes, monasteries, and villages using barley, oats, or wheat. Clean drinking water could be unreliable in crowded areas, so weak ale sometimes became a safer option because boiling during brewing reduced harmful bacteria. Medieval people may not have understood microorganisms scientifically, but they absolutely understood the unpleasant consequences of drinking water that smelled personally offended by humanity. Ale also provided calories and nutrients. For many laborers, daily drinks formed an important part of diet itself. Imagine waking before sunrise inside a freezing wooden house while rain leaks through the roof. Your job involves hauling stones or digging fields for 12 hours, and breakfast includes bread plus several mugs of mildly alcoholic grain liquid. Honestly, under those circumstances, most modern people would probably start fermenting things too. Monasteries became especially important centers of brewing knowledge. Monks carefully refined recipes, experimented with ingredients, and produced large quantities of beer and wine, both for religious use and practical consumption. Some monasteries became famous for brewing quality alcohol centuries before modern companies invented advertising campaigns featuring suspiciously cheerful people drinking beside beaches. Medieval monks may have spent long hours copying religious manuscripts, but they also quietly became some of Europe's most experienced alcohol producers. Humanity contains multitudes. Taverns flourished across medieval towns and villages. After exhausting workdays, people crowded into smoky rooms lit by candles and fireplaces where ale flowed alongside gossip, music, arguments, and deeply unreliable storytelling. Travelers exchanged news from distant kingdoms. Farmers complained about taxes and weather. Merchants bragged about profits. Somewhere nearby, someone absolutely insisted they could defeat 3 men simultaneously, despite barely standing upright. Medieval taverns functioned as social centers where loneliness briefly disappeared beneath noise and alcohol. And honestly, in a world filled with famine, plague, warfare, and winters cold enough to emotionally damage entire generations, temporary warmth and companionship probably mattered enormously. Of course, taverns also created problems. Drunken fights erupted regularly. Local authorities complained constantly about disorderly behavior. Religious leaders warned against excessive drinking, while populations continued ignoring them with impressive consistency. Human civilization has always maintained a complicated relationship with moderation. We admire it deeply in theory, right up until someone offers another round. As trade expanded during the late medieval and early modern periods, stronger forms of alcohol began spreading more widely across the world. Distillation techniques improved, allowing people to create drinks far more powerful than ordinary beer or wine. Humanity looked at fermented beverages and somehow decided the logical next step was concentrating them into liquids capable of making entire evenings disappear from memory entirely. This was a bold scientific direction. Distillation likely spread into Europe through knowledge exchange with the Islamic world, where scholars made major advances in chemistry, medicine, and scientific experimentation. Ironically, many Islamic societies restricted alcohol consumption religiously, yet contributed enormously to the techniques later used for producing stronger spirits elsewhere. History enjoys these little contradictions. Soon brandy, whiskey, rum, and other distilled drinks became increasingly common. Unlike weaker medieval ales, these spirits hit the human body with the subtlety of falling downstairs. Suddenly, intoxication arrived faster, lasted longer, and inspired even more terrible decisions. Sailors carried rum across oceans. Soldiers drank spirits before battles. Merchants sold bottles throughout growing cities where industrialization slowly transformed daily life. Humanity had officially entered its advanced drinking phase. Then came the age of exploration. European ships crossed enormous oceans carrying spices, silver, diseases, guns, religion, ambition, and truly staggering quantities of alcohol. Sailors received daily rations because long voyages were miserable beyond modern comprehension. Ships smelled awful. Food spoiled. Storms killed people randomly. Scurvy dissolved teeth and flesh while captains shouted motivational speeches no one genuinely appreciated. Under these conditions, alcohol became both comfort and currency. Rum especially became deeply tied to naval culture. Caribbean sugar plantations produced molasses used for rum production, linking alcohol directly to the brutal systems of colonialism and slavery spreading across the Atlantic world. Behind many cheerful historical drinking stories lurk deeply horrifying realities. Human civilization rarely builds luxury without someone suffering terribly somewhere else in the process. Still, taverns near major ports exploded with activity during this period. Sailors staggered ashore after months at sea, seeking alcohol, food, music, gambling, and companionship with the emotional restraint of starving wolves entering a bakery. Port cities became legendary for chaotic nightlife where fortunes vanished overnight and fights erupted over insults nobody remembered clearly by morning. By the 18th and 19th centuries, alcohol consumption in parts of Europe and America reached astonishing levels. Industrial cities grew rapidly while working conditions became exhausting and dangerous. Factories thundered constantly, air filled with smoke and soot. Crowded neighborhoods trapped poor families inside tiny, unhealthy apartments. Once again, alcohol offered temporary escape from relentless stress. Gin became especially infamous in England during the gin craze, when cheap, strong liquor flooded London. Artists created disturbing images of drunken crowds collapsing in filthy streets, while politicians panicked about moral decline. Some critics blamed alcohol for crime, poverty, violence, and social collapse. Others pointed out that crushing inequality and miserable living conditions might also contribute slightly to public despair. A radical theory, apparently. Meanwhile, breweries and distilleries became enormous businesses earning fortunes from humanity's ancient love of intoxication. Advertising evolved. Brands competed aggressively. Drinking transformed from local tradition into global industry. Somewhere along this long historical journey, humans stopped merely fermenting survival food and started building multinational corporations around it. Progress takes many forms. And yet, despite all the centuries separating modern people from prehistoric hunter-gatherers eating accidental fermented fruit beneath ancient trees, something fundamental never really changed. Alcohol still revolves around the same deeply human desires it always has: celebration, escape, bonding, relaxation, courage, forgetting embarrassment temporarily, making unbearable situations feel survivable for a few hours. Around the world tonight, people are still gathering together, exactly as humans did thousands of years ago, sharing drinks, telling stories, laughing too loudly, confessing emotions they normally keep hidden. Somewhere, someone is giving terrible romantic advice with complete confidence. Somewhere else, another person is insisting they are absolutely fine moments before tripping over furniture. Civilization evolves. Human behavior mostly improvises around the same emotional software forever. So the next time you see a glass of wine, beer, whiskey, or mead, remember you are looking at one of humanity's oldest inventions, older than writing, older than empires, older than most religions and governments. For thousands upon thousands of years, humans have gathered beside fires, inside taverns, around dinner tables, aboard ships and beneath city lights, sharing fermented drinks while trying to make sense of existence together. Sometimes wisely, sometimes catastrophically, usually somewhere in between. Hey guys, tonight we continue our long, slightly blurry journey through the history of alcohol. Because once humanity discovered fermentation, there was absolutely no chance people were going to calmly stop at one small cup beside the fire. No, civilization immediately looked at fermented fruit and thought, excellent, let's industrialize this. So before we continue tonight's deeply questionable adventure through human history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these slow dives into the strange side of the past. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're relaxing under blankets while learning how entire civilizations repeatedly convinced themselves that stronger alcohol was definitely the solution to most emotional problems. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's drift gently back into history together. By the time the modern world began emerging during the Industrial Revolution, alcohol was no longer simply part of local culture. It had become global business. Massive breweries expanded across Europe and America, while factories produced beer, wine, whiskey, rum, and gin on scales ancient civilizations could barely imagine. Humanity had officially entered the age of professional intoxication. Cities exploded with population as millions moved into crowded industrial centers searching for work. Smoke darkened the skies above factories. Streets filled with noise, soot, exhaustion, and enough stress to emotionally flatten entire generations. Workers spent 12 or 14 hours inside dangerous mills and mines where injuries happened constantly, and surviving to old age felt more like optimistic speculation than reliable expectation. Under these conditions, taverns and drinking houses became emotional escape valves for exhausted populations. After endless hours of labor beside deafening machinery, people wanted warmth, conversation, music, and something strong enough to temporarily erase the memory of another day inhaling coal dust beside moving gears capable of removing limbs with terrifying efficiency. Honestly, modern office workers drinking after stressful meetings are participating in a very old human tradition. The furniture simply became less wooden. Victorian London especially developed a complicated relationship with alcohol. Gin shops glowed through foggy streets late into the night, while newspapers published dramatic stories about public drunkenness destroying morality itself. Wealthy reformers gave passionate speeches about discipline and sobriety, while poorer citizens quietly wondered whether anyone delivering lectures from comfortable mansions had ever actually worked 16 hours in a factory before discussing personal responsibility. Beer halls, taverns, and pubs became gathering places where workers shared news, complained about bosses, debated politics, and occasionally settled disagreements through fistfights that almost certainly seemed smarter before several drinks. Some establishments offered music, dancing, gambling, or theatrical performances. Others mainly offered sticky floors and the strong possibility of waking up missing both your wallet and your dignity. Humanity continued innovating. At the same time, alcohol became deeply tied to empire and trade. European powers transported liquor across colonies worldwide, while local drinking traditions mixed with imported products in complicated ways. Rum remained central to Caribbean economies built through slavery and exploitation. Whiskey production expanded across Scotland, Ireland, and America. Wine industries flourished in France, Spain, and Italy. Everywhere alcohol traveled, it adapted itself into local customs and social rituals. Weddings, funerals, festivals, military victories, political meetings, business deals, family gatherings, heartbreak, celebrations, and personal disasters all somehow became reasons for drinking. Humans possess an extraordinary ability to associate fermented liquids with nearly every emotional state imaginable. Happy? Drink. Sad? Drink. Nervous? Drink. Successful? Drink. Failed spectacularly in front of everyone you know? Historically speaking, definitely drink. Then came one of humanity's boldest historical experiments: prohibition. Because after centuries of drunken chaos, violence, addiction, public disorder, and social problems linked to alcohol, certain governments eventually decided the solution was simple: ban alcohol entirely. This went about as smoothly as historians expected. In the United States during the 1920s, alcohol officially became illegal nationwide. Supporters believed banning liquor would reduce crime, strengthen families, improve morality, and transform society into a cleaner, healthier paradise filled with responsible citizens making excellent life choices. Instead, illegal bars called speakeasies exploded across cities almost immediately. Organized crime expanded enormously. Smugglers made fortunes transporting alcohol secretly. Corrupt police officers accepted bribes. Ordinary citizens quietly ignored the law with astonishing enthusiasm. Humanity's reaction to being told you cannot drink anymore was essentially, interesting suggestion, absolutely not. Speakeasies became legendary hidden nightlife spaces where jazz music echoed through smoky rooms, while bartenders served illegal cocktails behind secret doors. Passwords granted entry. Police raids became common. Gangsters battled for control over alcohol distribution networks, earning unimaginable profits from thirsty populations. Figures like Al Capone became internationally famous, while governments struggled to enforce laws millions of citizens simply did not respect. The entire situation demonstrated something deeply important about human psychology. Once societies integrate